Hi everybody and welcome to the PaymentGenes podcast series Voices in Payments. I'm your host Diederik Klopper, and in this podcast series we'll talk all about the recent developments in the payment industry. Today we're joined by Eddie Johnson. Eddie is the head of product marketing at AEVI. AEVI has found some workarounds towards some of the limitations that point-of-sale devices have. With Eddie we'll talk about Omnichannel, Appflow and the future of point-of-sale. Eddie, a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Happy to have you here. Hey Eddie, I always start with the same question. I never met anybody who woke up one day and said, I'm going to be a payment expert. How did you stumble into payments?
Well, what happened is I woke up one day and said, I'm going to be a payments expert.
Finally, I found it.
No, like I think everybody that's come on your podcast, I came into payments by accident. I actually started off as a teacher. I taught high school kids how to use computers for 5 years. Wow. And from there, I took a slightly strange path via being a developer to being a product manager and project manager for websites for a web agency. And from there, moved over to payments via the Android space because
that's the
smart
entrance.
POS devices, right? So I was Android first, payments second, and that's how I joined AEVI. I was actually the product manager for a lot of their sort of Android device tools, and from there I've now moved to being the head of product marketing, so the guy that talks about the product a lot here at AEVI.
Yeah, and we also like to talk product. Speaking of which, AEVI is a massive company and a broad portfolio of services that you offer. But just talk us through it. What do you guys do?
Yeah, super high level. We have a platform that allows our customers, who are typically large acquirers or people that are merchant facing themselves, to simplify their sort of face-to-face payments in many ways. Obviously, I've mentioned very briefly the work that we do with smart POS devices. In fact, many people who know AEVI know that we had one of the first smart POS devices out on the market in a device called the Albert. We don't make devices anymore. We just make the platforms that run the things. So we do a lot of stuff with face-to-face payments, device management, and generally unifying and simplifying the payments world.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, everybody in payment industry is talking about omnichannel, which is connecting offline to online. And 50% of that is in-store face-to-face payments of that transition. How would you define a true omnichannel experience? And how does AEVI fit into that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It tends to be one of those buzzwords, right? People want omnichannel everything, and
exactly.
And then you say, well, what does that mean? For me, omnichannel essentially means that I should never have to tell someone something twice. If I've told you who I am in store, then you should know who I am online. If I've told you who I am online, then you should know who I am in store. If I've bought something off you in one place, then I should be able to return it to another place. I should be able to get support on the things that I've purchased, no matter which channel that I go through, right? And it's all about that centralization of the information and the centralization of the data to give me, the customer, and I always look at it from the customer side of things, right? I want the best experience possible, no matter how I decide to engage with your store. The amount of times I've seen a shop and I've gone on there and I've gone onto that shop's website and I've seen a better deal on that shop's website, and I can't physically buy it now for the same price that I could buy it from their own online store from is pretty ridiculous. So it's solving those challenges. It's solving that disconnect between the different ways of shopping.
Yeah, and as well, the examples that you can see here in the Netherlands, there's a store where I bought trousers online. They were just one size too big, went into the store and was able to swap them out for the size that fit. That's already miles ahead of many of the competition. Why is it such a difficult thing to achieve for companies?
There are lots of reasons, and again, coming from the web world, I'm well aware of many of them. But the main reason is because the two universes, as it were, the online and the payments and the in-person payments world, grew up completely separately. The website was often an afterthought that was created a few years ago off the back of the need for a website, and it was never seen as a serious sales channel when it was first launched. Whereas the in-store has always been a serious sales channel that's been heavily regulated and hard to change. So you've got these two worlds, one which was never really created with serious sales in mind, and one which obviously was created with serious sales in mind, but has been hugely heavily regulated, making it very hard to adapt it. And bringing those two worlds together is a real challenge. The biggest thing that you'll find is when you say to a company, right, we're gonna make a change to make things better, you've got to go through a lot of pain to get to the good at the end, right? I remember working for a large retail store when I was at university, and that large retail store at the time implemented a new point of sale system, and the new point of sale system was better in every way, right? When you looked at it objectively, it was better in every way. It was big color screens with touch screens, and we'd been using this old school, text-based interface before, and every single member of staff hated the new system because they were all used to the old one, right? So it was disruptive. We all hated it. We all had to be retrained on it. It was a huge upheaval, but once it was in, the benefits were obvious because we had that connection to online and all of these sorts of things. So it's just getting over that hump.
Yeah, and that's as well. I'm not sure if you've seen the meme where there's a leader standing in front of a large audience and asking who wants change, and everybody screams from the top of their lungs. And then he asks who wants to change, and then everybody's dead, silent. I think that's as well the transition that you talk about here.
Yeah, it's halfway between that and the other meme, which is the caveman dragging along his large bundle of things, and the other guy comes up and says, "Hey, here's the wheel," and the caveman says, "Hey, I'm too busy for your new invention."
Exactly. Hey, and then how does AEVI fit into that picture? Because, like you said, you facilitated the face payments. How does it transition into an omnichannel then?
Sure. So you're absolutely right. We very much focus on solving face-to-face challenges, but that doesn't mean that we don't keep our eye on everything else, right? We are not an online payments provider, but what we are is a channel through which these things can be connected. So everything that we do in online payments is designed to open the gates and to open the doors to proper data sharing. So when you perform a transaction on an AEVI run terminal, that transaction, rather than just going straight to the acquirer and back again, can be notified to other places. So for example, we can integrate with an online commerce platform, and as soon as a transaction is made in store, the online commerce platform can receive a notification of that transaction. But not just the core transaction itself. Our platform allows us to collect all of the data around that transaction as well, and pass that through to the relevant channels. So we in ourselves are not an omni-channel solution, right? We are a face-to-face payment solution, but we have been architected from the ground up to be able to implement that omni-channel experience, to be able to share the data in the right way, in a way that the main data repositories are going to be expecting it, and importantly, in real time, right? So you don't have to wait for a day or 2 days when you've done your transaction to be able to go online and see it. So everything that we do, we try and do in real time.
Yeah, and I think a massive part of that as well is Appflow, what you guys designed. I think you're as well mainly responsible for that. I've seen already some presentation, but for the listeners who don't know it yet, talk us through it.
Yeah, so Appflow, and I do like that I come across as responsible for it. It's actually the development team that were responsible for it. I just take all the credit. But Appflow,
Poor developers.
It's their own fault. Appflow is an interesting part of that, and actually we've got a new product coming up called Cloudflow as well, which extends the concept. But the idea
nice.
of Appflow is essentially to remove all of the barriers for two things, right? And when we look at these sort of point of sale experiences, and you take the restrictions off the point of sale, and we can make it so that any apps can run on any devices and all of this good stuff, we found two major challenges. One was making these apps talk to each other. And that was a big challenge, and that's a big challenge for anyone that's been in the development world. Getting two companies to talk and integrate with each other is hard. And secondly, making multiple apps feel like a unified checkout experience on the device. So we have this problem of communication and we have this problem of orchestration. And Appflow solves both of those challenges on the point of sale devices that it runs on. It allows a seamless checkout experience. And coming back to your point about omnichannel and data sharing, it allows the data to be shared between those applications in a seamless and unified way. So the app developers don't have to talk to each other to integrate anymore. They all talk to Appflow, and they can all receive the data about the transaction in a way that they're going to be expecting it. So we've taken that and solved loads of challenges on smart POS devices, which is crazy. We already look at smart POS devices as being, the thing with challenges to overcome, not just the big opportunity. So we've solved all of those challenges, and now what we're doing with Cloudflow is we're taking that sort of orchestration idea and saying, well, look, a transaction doesn't just live on the device. We've solved that. We've got that on the device. We know that these apps can flow together, hence Appflow, and share the data seamlessly. But what happens when that transaction comes off the device and goes into the cloud, either to talk back to a cash register or to talk to the acquirer or to do whatever it needs to do? How can we pull in extra services at that point as well? And that's where we're going, Cloudflow.
Yeah, and now I have the unique opportunity to speak to somebody who's got experience on the development side, but as well talks the business side. So everybody speaks about it. It's super difficult to get different platforms to speak to each other. So you as a developer, why is it so difficult, and what is the solution? Because obviously you found one.
Yeah, and the difficulty is actually not a development challenge. The difficulty is often a political challenge. You look at these big platforms, and everybody says, "Okay, cool. You want to talk to us? Here is how you talk to us. Right? Here is the language that you need to speak to talk to us." And then you have the other company on the other side saying, "No, no, no. Here is the language you need to speak to talk to us." Right? So you have these, often big companies who just play a political game of, "No, no, no. You integrate to me." And the thing that we found with Appflow is two things. One, because we are helping smaller developers have a bigger platform, right? One of the things with the point of sale is, traditionally, unless you do everything, you can do nothing. Because unless you cover all of the bases, then you're not relevant in that market. Whereas we're saying, because we can make lots of smaller applications work together to cover all that functionality, we can work with smaller developers. We can work with developers who are more agile, more responsive to change, more responsive to being able to put out new features. But because we're working with these smaller developers, they're much more receptive to make those changes, right? And importantly, where we have a need to, for example, go out to another standard, another language, we need to work with a big company who's not going to change. We've built Appflow from the ground up to be flexible, to be responsive to these alternative methods of communication. So, for example, with everything that we do, we standardize the way that we talk only in documentation. We don't hard code it into the devices. We don't hard code it into the apps. So if someone comes along and says, actually, for basket data, we need it to look like this, then that's fine. We can just update our documentation and all of our systems will still work with it. So we've deliberately built everything to be flexible and to be responsive to these needs, so that when we inevitably come across the large company, the large accounting software company that say either we won't change or we will change, but it will take us 3 years, then we can respond to that and we can make the middleware or the piece of translation equipment very, very quickly.
Yeah, you make it sound really easy, but why hasn't anybody else done it so far? Because the only reason I can think of, it's far more complicated than it sounds.
Yeah, one of the biggest reasons is not because it's more complicated than it sounds, although it is more complicated than it sounds. One of the biggest reasons is because there's a big question around who would have done it, and everyone outside of the sort of AEVI universe has a reason not to. So if you talk to a large application developer, they have a reason not to make this interchange easy because they want to be the only app on the device. They want to have that piece of the pie to themselves. You talk to the device manufacturers, they don't want you to write to an open standard. They want you to write to their device because that ties you to them. And again, every player that you look at in this realm has a reason to not make it easy. Whereas AEVI come along and say, look, guys, actually one of our core tenets, one of the core things that we're trying to achieve is more openness in the payment space. We're trying to break vendor lock-in for acquirers, to say to acquirers, look, guys, you don't need to use the systems from the device vendor that tie you to that device vendor forever. You can use systems that can work with any device. And so we come along and are trying to break down these barriers, and that puts us in a prime position to actually be able to put the technology in the middle that allows this agnosticity.
Yeah. Did it as well offer some difficulties in selecting a hardware supplier, for instance?
Well, again, we don't select hardware suppliers. We work with multiple hardware vendors, and
But you need the access to their platform, right, in order to build the product for that.
yeah, and that was a big challenge to start with. We're not going to lie, especially coming from the place where we said, we were a hardware vendor when we started down this path. We had our own piece of hardware, so a lot of these guys saw us as competitors.
The competitor.
And they were like, well, why would we give our competitor access to our platform or access to our device? And actually, as we explained, look, we're hardware agnostic. We're moving away from our own hardware. Then we had two types of device manufacturers that ended up working with us. One are the ones that are really receptive to wanting to work with us, that believe in our goals, that want to move forwards with that. And we've got 4 or 5 partners who are like that, who will say, look, guys, we are 100% behind you. We know that your management platform is better than ours. We know that your management platform has huge advantages, and actually we believe that together we can do more. And then we have the hardware manufacturers that are still trying with the old world to grab the acquirers and to say to our customers, no, you need to use our solutions.
Yeah.
And what we found with those, we call them situational partners rather than proactive partners, because what happens is when the large customer comes along, they see the benefits of our open platform, but they still want to use the hardware from one of these traditional players. We have found that every single time when we've gone and spoken to them about these big opportunities, they've said, okay, yeah, fine, no problem at all. You can play in our swimming pool now. And it just takes that deal to get it over the line. So again, we work with people proactively, we work with people situationally, but every single time when there's been, an acquirer on the table, it's been no problem.
Nice, great to hear. Great to hear. And then you mentioned Appflow, but as well, the coming up Cloudflow. What's the main step there that you're going to take?
Yeah, so the main driver behind the first release of Cloudflow, which is coming up before the end of the year, is to allow more integration between multiple systems, right? Appflow solves integration between systems on a device. So if you've got a smart POS device, you've got lots of apps running on the smart POS device. Appflow solves that challenge.
So anything from loyalty to split payments, you name it.
Exactly, yeah. From the POS to the payment app with everything in between, that's where Appflow really sits. With Cloudflow, the first challenge that we've gone to solve is to say, look, initiating a payment on a device from another device is sometimes complicated, right? So if you need to have your point of sale on a tablet or on a Windows PC or on something else that's not the payment device, and then take the payment on the payment device, that can often be challenging, right? And having that interchange. So that's the first challenge that Cloudflow goes to solve. It allows you to start a payment remotely on any payment terminal, whether it's a smart terminal or whether it's a traditional terminal, from wherever you are. So it can be an online point of sale system. It could even be a website, right? And again, when we're talking about omni-channel, tying all of those systems together is really important. So being able to start
for my imagination, does it mean that I'm standing in store on my phone, I'm going to a website, or on the tablet that is in store, I'm going to the website, select all the items that I want to purchase, and that then connects to the terminal to facilitate my payment?
Absolutely, that's the sort of use case that we're looking at with Cloudflow, right? Is breaking down those barriers between what lives where? Does it have to live on a payment device? And we're always future looking, so we know at some point in the future payments are going to be moved away from traditional secured payments devices and onto consumer style devices,
Well, we've
right?
seen it, of course, with the Apple acquisition of MobiWave, which is the first step in that direction. And of course,
Yeah, exactly.
Android has been there already for some time.
Yeah, exactly. So we've always got one eye on okay, well, what are the payment devices of the future? We already look at Android smart POS devices, although they have a long path ahead of them. We're already looking at those as still in the traditional world of payment devices that are specialist payment hardware. We're looking at what's coming next, what is going to replace the specialist payment hardware, and at some point in the future there's going to be no hardware at all, right? It's going to move even beyond consumer device to consumer device. It's going to move to, we don't even need a piece of hardware to make payments happen. And so we're always looking at how we can keep those systems connected, how we can keep those payments, because at the end of the day, there's always going to be a back end to that payment. There's always going to need to be routing somehow. There's always going to need to be some sort of communication and data flow. And so we're always looking at how our systems can enable those next steps. And Cloudflow is one of those solutions.
Yeah, and then hey, you mentioned no hardware involved in the payment. How do you see that? What hypothetically, how could that work?
Well, you see, that's for other people to invent, and then me to work out how we make work.
How to implement it.
But you can easily see a way, even with you look at some emerging markets, you look at in the APAC region, and the rise of things like WeChat Pay, right? With WeChat Pay, with the QR code based payments, I as a merchant, I as the vendor, don't have to have any physical piece of hardware. I can print out a QR code, right, and put it on my wall. Someone can walk in, scan the QR code, make a payment to me, and then I can check it on my phone or on my smartwatch or on my PC or whatever it is, and make sure I have received that payment. That's the first step to this sort of hardwareless payment world. And that is only going to grow. The more people want frictionless payments, the more people want, I don't want to have to queue. I don't want to have to tap a thing anymore. I don't even want to take a device with me. That is gonna.
But as well, some of the downsides of MobiWave, for instance, is that you have to enter your PIN on the hardware device owned by somebody else. Much more convenient to own than to tap your PIN in on your own device, for instance. So those are already breaking down barriers.
And with the rise of pinless payments, so on my Android device, where the payment terminal supports it, I can do higher value transactions without having to enter my PIN anywhere, because I've identified myself to my device, and my device has said, "Yeah, I know
already
that's you,
SCA
done a
approved."
biometric." Exactly, right? So with things like that, I shouldn't have to identify myself to you for my payment. I should have to identify myself to me to prove
to
that
my
I'm
wallet.
the one using my device, right? And it's about that shift in mindset, and obviously security mindsets change slowly. They really do. But actually, if you look into the US region, right, they've actually, while American payments look so behind and slow for so many people in the West, in the Western world, in outside the US, right, where they're still using signature, they're still using old school methods of payment, as far as we're concerned, because we've been chip and pin for so long, and we've now been NFC for so long. The actual concept in America is much more about proof and identification. I am proving to you that I'm allowed to use my card. I'm not proving to you that I'm allowed to use my card, right? And the signature is actually security for me, not security for you. And it's the US has always been built on that sort of other way round security.
It's well, the US mindset about chargeback, etc., is totally different here than in Europe. I remember that I first had a mischarge on my credit card, and then I called my bank, say, "Listen, I want a chargeback," and they said, "Well, you have to talk to the store." So, no, I don't. So,
yeah, obviously with AEVI being a global company, you learn some of these foibles and little uniquenesses quite quickly. When I did my first project working with a US payments company, and I learned how payments work in US restaurants, where actually when you're paying, you're not paying, you're authorizing an amount. And then when they bring you the bill and you put your tip on it, they don't actually take that money at any point until the end of the day. And at the end of the day, they go through all of this stack of
The settlements.
checks and actually, settle the authorizations, which to me is completely crazy, especially when I've been taught, for the last 10 years, never to let my card out of sight, always to have the card machine come to me. It's still just not like that. And it's a real challenge for a global company like AEVI, where there are such individual mindsets in different companies about what is and isn't secure, what is and isn't the way to do things.
And there's even not a general consensus under the regulators. So that's
Yeah, well, the regulators are often half the problem.
I think we can fill an entire podcast talking about that.
Yeah, and that's what's really interesting for me is coming from not in the payments world, and as I said, my background is not payments. My background is usability, accessibility. I was a front end web developer to start with, so I had all of these things in mind for so many years. Actually, payments is often the usability and the accessibility are obscured by the security, right? And I can understand why, but what's really interesting for me is coming from the outside is being able to look in and say, but why do we do that, right? But why is that always the way? Oh, that's how we've always had to do it. Yeah, but why have we always had to do it that way? Because it always reminds me of the old fable where someone's putting a roast dinner in the oven, right? And they take a lamb and they cut the end off the lamb and they put it in the oven and they cook the lamb. And the daughter says, "Why do you always cut the end off the lamb?" And she says, "Oh, it's because that's what my mother always used to do." And they go to the grandmother and they say, "Well, why do you cut the end off the lamb?" And they say, "Well, because my oven was too small to cook lamb." And it's like, well, we've carried on doing these things even though they don't make any sense anymore. And there's so much of that in this industry that trying to break down those norms is really important.
Indeed, that's a funny story. And then you also sort of mentioned once again the global reach that an AV has. Of course, now we're living in quite absurd times with the COVID-19 situation. How do you see any changes in payment behavior in the face-to-face payment world vary across regions and do you see a massive influence on COVID besides that people are less willing or less open to go to stores? But is there a shift in the way they want to pay or the flows that they're taking on your devices?
Yes, is the short answer. Payment has become more and more of a necessary evil in the store, right? You're seeing more and more the rise of contactless payment. This has really pushed cash down, which is good for the card payment people, but it's driven the rise even more than it already was of contactless payment and device-based payment rather than card-based payment. You're moving away from the situation where you even want to put your card into a machine anymore and you just want to tap it and walk away. So it's all about speed, it's all about efficiency, and it's about minimizing the impact of the interactions that you have to have. Also, on top of that, more than ever, people who were traditionally in-person customers are becoming online customers.
And seeing the benefits of it.
And seeing the benefits of it. My personal story of that is I have a local micro pub, which I have a picture of right here, called the Dodo. The Dodo micro pub, which is my local micro pub, and obviously they were shut through the whole pandemic, but they opened up an online store where I could go and I could order my 4 pints of locally sourced beer. I do have the beard to go with this, by the way, so the beer and the beard go hand in hand. I could order that online and I could just walk down to their store and collect it. And so, in that situation, traditionally an in-person customer for that retailer, it was important that I received the same, not just the same product. The product is only half the deal, right? It's the service, it's the friendliness, it's the neighborhood vibe that I got from that particular pub that makes me like it. And so it was important for them to be able to carry across that ethos, that sort of feel onto their online presence. And that's really important for these stores that are picking up online retail from traditionally in-person customers. They need to know what makes those customers in-person customers? What makes those customers keep coming back? And be able to translate that across to different mechanisms of working.
Yeah, and at the same time as well, find a way in order to accept payments on locations perhaps that they were not used to. And of
Absolutely.
course, MPOS devices are a massive part of that.
Yeah. Being able to walk up to someone's front door, deliver them something, and take the payment there and then would be a
Yeah,
huge boon for a lot of these companies, right? And
yeah,
and some of the modern smart POS devices where you can do everything on the device, you don't need another device to be able to deal with that, would be a huge solver for some of these things.
yeah, exactly. And then looking heads up perhaps towards some more micro merchants. And I know that you're mostly tending towards the acquirers, but I could also see a situation where micro merchants, masseuses or whatever, sole practitioner, use your solution in order to facilitate payments to their clientele as well.
Yeah, so for a micro merchant space, they've for so long been very well served by basic payment solutions. So they can take basic payments. That's it. And that bit's easy. Yes, there's cost associated with it in percentages of that transaction, but there's two problems with that. With the sort of MPOS solutions, one is I have to use my own device, right? People look at an MPOS solution as a cheap way of taking payments, but actually, if I'm a micro merchant, but I'm running a stall every single day, then either I'm using my own personal device to take all of those payments to connect up to the MPOS device, and that means my device is basically out of service while I'm busy.
Yeah,
Or I buy a dedicated device to take those payments and to connect to my MPOS solution. And all of a sudden, that MPOS solution isn't so cheap anymore. Yes, it was a €50 dongle to actually take the payments, but I'm connecting it to a $600 or €600 iPhone,
yeah,
and all of a sudden I've got a €650 solution. Whereas an integrated smart POS device, yes, it has a higher cost than just a single MPOS device, but it's an all-in-one unit, right? I can do potentially my point of sale on there, my loyalty on there. I've got this integrated unit which I can leave with my stand. I don't need to worry about taking it home and desyncing it and depairing it. It takes a lot of the security worries out of it for people because it looks like a dedicated piece of payment hardware. It
yeah.
takes a lot of the support challenges out because I'm not connecting a device to another device. So these smart POS devices, almost as the next step up, right? You've proven that you need to take card payments. Let's look at what the next thing is for you, and an integrated smart POS device is good for so many people.
Yeah, I can as well imagine that people are quite hesitant to enter personal data on a POS device, but perhaps indeed a cash register system is something that they're already more familiarized with. So, and making the connection there is more natural to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And where it looks like that's the one advantage of dedicated payment hardware, right? Is people trust it.
Yeah,
You look at it, it looks like a dedicated piece of payment hardware, and it comes with all of those years of
yeah,
built trust, where you go, okay, well, this must be a secure device.
yeah, indeed. And then looking towards the future, we already touched upon it a few times, but how do you see the point of sale transitioning in the coming 2 to 3 years, or perhaps 4 to 5 years? And then as well, if we're looking at 20, 25 years down the line, what are some of the developments that we can see?
Yeah, flexible, I think, is the short answer. I think, if we look at the next 2 to 3 years, there are definitely going to be lots of point of sales that look like point of sales today, right?
Yeah,
Not we're not at the point where in 3 years' time everyone's going to be making payments in different ways, but we are at the point where in 2 to 3 years some people will be making payments in different ways, and some retailers will want to accept those payments in different ways. Things like peer-to-peer payments, QR code payments,
just
non-traditional
offering
alternative.
all the payments that you have online in store makes total
Absolutely.
sense.
Being able to pay with cryptocurrency is in person is one of those things that has been a dream for a while. It's been a sort of vision of people for a while, and it's had issues and it's had problems. But if people want to do it, people will want to
Yeah.
accept it, right? And it's about offering that choice and flexibility.
And I've always said that once you can pay with cryptocurrencies in store, that's when the coin will stabilize as well. Because at the moment it's too volatile because it's not generally accepted as a payment method. But if you
Yeah,
have
you have
that,
to.
then it automatically, I think, will stabilize as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And there are wider challenges around all of that. Time for
Yeah,
payment is a huge issue, right? Time to make a payment. If I go into a retail shop and I've got a queue of people behind me and I tap my crypto card, let's whatever it is, and it says, okay, cool, I'm going to authorize that payment in 5 minutes,
yeah,
then
that's
that's
not
no good to
working.
me, right?
Yeah,
I'm not going to stand there. So there are challenges around that, but it is something that people need to be looking at. It's something
yeah.
that people need to be aware of.
And in general, I think still it's a weird concept that online I have all these alternative payment methods to my choosing, and in store I can't choose a buy now pay later solution that easily.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's yet another thing that drives people out of stores, right?
Yeah.
If I can go online and pay with even something big like my online PayPal account, for example, if I can go online and pay with that, but I can't pay with it in store, then I might be more likely to make my transaction online, even if I do it on my phone while I'm standing in the store, right? We had a large conversation about this concept of web rooming and showrooming, where
Hmm.
you look online and buy in store, or you look in store and you buy online, and it's not that simple, right? I came up with the concept of boomer rooming, because what often happens is, I'll look at something in a store, I'll see it online because it's been targeted adverted to me, and then I'll go into a different store and they'll have a different version of it, and then I'll look at it on my phone, and it's never as
Yeah.
clear cut as I look in one place and buy in another. It's all about, as a consumer, when the time is right to buy it, is it easy?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And then that's all tying into the user experience of of the consumers. Of course, now a lot of companies have been pushed onto online, but still have a strong in-store face-to-face payment ecosystem. Looking at those companies who still have a very clear division between the two, they're not integrated at all. What are some of the steps that they can make to increase to optimize their user experience for their in-store payments? What are the first steps they should be looking at, should be taking in order to improve that?
The first step, um, and you see, I always uh, tie user experience with accessibility, right? And whenever you've got a touch point for a customer, you need to make sure that that touch point is accessible for whoever it is that's going to be accessing it. And that can mean a lot of things, right? It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Whether it's you need it to be accessible because you have some sort of disability or impairment, whether you just need it to be accessible for your particular type of device. That's really what people need to focus on when it comes to these systems. If they want people to interact with their system, they need that system to be easy to use at the point that it's going to be used. And that can take so many different forms that obviously we can't cover them all here. But one example when it comes to this, the omni-channel world is I need to collect data, right? And if I need to collect data about you to be able to make omni-channel happen, then that data collection needs to not be a hindrance, right? And the
Yeah,
best example of this I've seen recently is one of the stores that I frequent. Um, uh, Wants to gather my email address, right? They clearly want to gather my email address because they ask me for my email address every time I make a payment. And there's no benefit to me, so I'm never going to give them my
yeah,
email address. Another store I go into says, oh, instead of me giving you a physical receipt, would you like me to email that to you?
yeah,
And I will gladly at that point hand over my email address, because then I don't have a physical piece of paper that I need to walk out of the store with. I feel good because I'm not, wasting another piece of paper. And it means that I've got my transaction receipt in my email. And for them, they have the benefit that they've now collected my email address,
yeah.
right? So having that sort of seamless hookup and that accessibility in both directions really makes a difference.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Indeed, gathering data should as well be a transaction. There should be a benefit for the consumer for him to share his or her data
Yeah,
before it
exactly.
really makes sense to do so. All right. Well, Eddie, I think we covered a lot of ground. Anything that we didn't discuss yet that we think you think we should touch on?
Uh, Not from my side, no. I think, as you say, I think we've covered quite a lot there. We should maybe have a second conversation at some point and talk about completely different
Oh,
subjects.
I'm all for that. I'm all for that. No, but I definitely think we can fill another podcast. We already shortly touched upon rules and regulations. I think that's an interesting one, but let's leave that for the future. But thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and I think definitely we learned a lot. And a massive thanks to you.
Thank you. And you can see why I stopped developing, how I talk too much.
Indeed. Were you the ones who had a paper on his back saying, "Don't talk to me, I'm working"?
No, I was the one who that paper was aimed at.
I can imagine. No, thanks a lot. It's been enlightenment, and thanks very much for participating.
Thank you for having me, guys.
All right. The Voices in Payments podcast is an initiative launched by PaymentGenes, aimed at positively impacting the payments community by educating and connecting the market with vertical-specific industry expertise. We as PaymentGenes empower the industry by focusing on the fundamentals for business growth. We achieve this by providing industry-leading payments recruitment, business and data strategy consulting services. Check out paymentgenes.com for more info, and please follow us on social media for more jobs, company updates, industry insights, and more.